G'day folks, my name is Rob and welcome back for another F1 fantasy video. In today's video, we're going through my team selection for the Formula One AWS Gran Premio del Maid in Italy e dell'Emilia Romagna 2025. So as always, if you're new around here, please do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and are enjoying the F1 fantasy content this season. So as always with these videos, we're going to go through how my team did in the most recent Grand Prix, the Miami Grand Prix, and what this means for our team selection and transfer plans moving forward. We'll get straight into how the weekend shook out in South Beach, and what a weekend it was. If you joined me on my deadline stream, it was by far and away the most enjoyable deadline stream I've had this season. A huge turnout, and it was partly on the back of not just a couple of difficult transfer decisions, but also because chip strategy was thick and fast. Limitless was a very popular chip heading into the deadline. And then with the weather taking a turn for the worse in the lead up to the sprint race, a lot of people, myself included, pivoted within about 30 minutes of the deadline to use the no negative chip, which turned out to be an absolute masterstroke. I have to say that saved probably not just my weekend, but maybe, well, my season as well. And from what could have been, 250 points soon became more than 300 after Alonso, Behrman and Bortoleto all DNF'd across the weekend in my team. So heading into the deadline, I was tossing up between Lawson and Alonso. Both drivers ultimately did DNF over the weekend. So really net zero difference there with the exception of a point or two. But Oscar Piastri, 3 wins on the bounce for this season. I'm so impressed by him. What a drive. Driver of the day to go along with a 58-point performance. The driver of the day boosted him above Lando Norris's highest score at the time. And aside from, the utter carnage that unfolded on track, I do feel sorry for a lot of people that didn't activate the no negative, because most people, I'd say almost everyone, had at least one in Miami. It was, funnily enough, not even the rain on the Sunday that prompted the DNFs. But regardless, a good weekend. All of these scores you see here are from the drivers that had their scores adjusted through the no negative chip. So I got a 100,000 rank increase from the 160s up to inside 68,000. So very happy with how that played out. Everyone did their part, obviously. I say that with obviously the no negative covering my ass. But all in all, a very good weekend. And I think Limitless users, I will just talk about Limitless users for a second. Got very lucky the rain didn't come through in droves on Sunday. But after what was a pretty disappointing Saturday where Antonelli and Verstappen crashed in the pits, 2 very popular Limitless assets, they turned it around, as well as the McLaren drivers and George Russell on the Sunday. So I think Limitless users came out with about 380, 390 points. My team too, I activated Limitless, but I put Verstappen as my 2x because I thought it would be a wet race. We know how good Max is in the wet weather, but regardless, another great weekend for a lot of teams. A tough pill to swallow for very few others, but we keep moving, we keep pushing forward. The one thing I will say is, because of all these DNFs, the budget is not looking too pretty. And let's talk about that right away. So obviously talked about how no negative saved the weekend for many people. Limitless was mixed. Obviously they could have had a much higher score because of the Max Verstappen Antonelli pit lane run-in. But I do think most people, because they were either on Limitless or no negative, still got hit by the DNF bug. Alonso went down, Lawson went down, Hadjar didn't really do much at all. I think he went down 0.2. And the usual reliable drivers, the Behrmans, the Hadjars of the world, who are known for scoring points and price rises, it just wasn't to be. And so I think, to fast track all the way down to point number 3, the midfield was an absolute crapshoot. It's so unpredictable now. And I think that's honestly the state of play most race weekends. I'd almost argue B-tier drivers have had their rub of the green the first few races of the season. And we've pivoted into, many of us at least, have pivoted into the right drivers at the right time. But this was a perfect storm for a number of bad reasons, and a lot of B-tier drivers were hit pretty badly. Now, another driver in the B-tier, Alex Albon, looks so good this season. He has been on an absolute tear. And I'm honestly very much considering, we'll talk about him in just a little bit, bringing him into my team in Imola. He's had double-digit scores in every single race this season, except for Japan, where he came away with 8. So Albon's looking good. Every time Sainz looks like he's about to drop a DNF off his average, he then goes and gets another one. So I think at the point where he does actually become a viable fantasy option, he might well be about 6 million or so, because he's far from his starting season price. He's now all the way down at 9.5 million, and he was starting the season around 12. So he's just dropped and dropped and dropped in price and in ownership, and it might well be some time more until we do see him back in our fantasy team. So Williams is a bit of a mixed bag, as is the midfield in general, but I do think just with how everything shook out in F1 Fantasy in Miami, it means planning for Limitless, for those of us who haven't used it yet, myself included, have a very difficult time and a very difficult decision right now to decide as to whether we kind of bite the bullet on a couple of price drops. And I know some of the folks who had Gasly in Saudi Arabia just kind of suffered through his price drop in Miami, and we may well have to do something similar, which is why having drivers that won't go down in price appeal to me. And that's where one such driver comes into play here. So before we get into Franco Colapinto and a huge lol at the photo I managed to scrounge off Google, I want to talk about Alex Albon. I alluded to the Thai driver just before. He's been a beacon of consistency for Williams this season, averaging over 13 points per race. So his 1 point per million basis, as at the current time, is exceptionally good value for a midfield driver. He's been, in my opinion, the most underrated in terms of an F1 fantasy asset. And I think he's just not really had a place in our team since early in the season because of the fact a lot of us have had a premium driver and 2 premium constructors. And until now, where we've actually got a bit more budget to be flexible with, Albon's now suddenly becoming an appealing option. The one thing I will say, Williams historically haven't been one of the more reliable teams on the grid, but right now a lot of really good signs are pointing towards Alex Albon. I'm really loving what I'm seeing from him in terms of fantasy production. The Williams just seems to be on an upward trajectory. Some folks are even saying in the paddock that Williams are now the 4th fastest car. Ferrari have clearly regressed even more. And so I think with that, and because he's 12.8 attainable for quite a few people with budget of more than 110 million, I really like Albon heading into Imola. The other driver I want to talk about is Franco Colapinto. Now, at the time of recording, there has not been any confirmed news as to whether he will be stepping into Alpine to replace Jack Doohan. A lot of news was circulating after the race weekend that this driver swap is very much on the cards, and it looks to happen before the Imola Grand Prix, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Now, Jack Doohan is currently priced at 4.5 million. And I was talking about this on Twitter, not long after the race weekend concluded, around whether or not Colapinto comes in at the price Jack Doohan is, or because he's had 9 races in 2024, does that mean his entry price is maybe a bit higher than Jack's? Sure, I think 4.5 is not what Franco's potential is, but at the same time, Jack's obviously had a number of really bad races to start the season. That could happen to any driver who started the year at 6.2 million. So I think for that reason, I wouldn't be surprised to see Colapinto at 5 or less. Regardless of that, if he's a $4.5 million asset, he is going to be hot property for a lot of people. He came in at 4.5 to replace Sargent last year, but that was because he was an untested rookie. This time he's had some reps. I think he'll probably be, I thought he'd be closer to 4.5. The more I think about it, it might actually be 5. I'd be very surprised if he was above 5, 5.5. It just wouldn't make sense when you've got the likes of Hulkenberg at a similar price running around. So just something to think about. But because Albon's now on the watch list, it means budget enablers like the Colapintos of the world suddenly become an attractive option. And because he's now at 4.5, the price floor, he will not go down any further in price, even if he has a stinker of a race, much like Bortoleto has been doing for the last few races. An absolute mess of a fantasy asset, but he hasn't lost any value. So that's a win. So what does my team look like? Way too early thoughts. Another 2 weeks between races. We've had one. By the time we get to Imola, we will have had 1 race in 4 months. Isn't that crazy? So this is kind of how the team's looking. A couple of drivers at risk, a couple of drivers and constructors firmly in the team for what feels like another week. Now, I was talking about Imola Limitless. That was the plan before Miami. Obviously, Behrman DNF'd. He sunk in price. Alonso, again, cannot catch a break at the moment with these DNFs. But Alonso again dropped in price. He will most likely be on the chopping block. What I was talking about before is there's not going to be that perfect weekend to use Limitless, it feels like. There's always going to be a DNF hanging over our heads. We may well just have to accept the 0.6. Anyone that used it in Saudi Arabia is probably laughing because there were no B tier DNFs. There were really no DNFs at all that weekend. So I think for me, it's probably damage limitation, if nothing else. Maybe I go Limitless in Imola, maybe go Limitless in Monaco. There's almost no world in which I personally can see myself using that chip after these next two races. There's talk around the technical directive in Spain. Hungary feels a little too late for me. I'm probably, inclined to use it for my own team in the next couple of weeks. And I feel like I've got a bit of momentum and a bit of wind into my sails. So that's why if I go down non-limitless for one more week, that's kind of the targets I'll be looking at. So before I get into my team selection, I do want to jump into the budget builder on f1fantasytools.com and to, I guess, continue on the discussion around how hard it is to pick reliable drivers. Before I do, 50% discount code in the description for F1 Fantasy Tools. Again, we all use this incredible resource almost every single race weekend to guide our decisions and transfers. I think you can get all these features, and I'm not saying anything new for free if you go onto the website, but I think for how much effort these guys behind the screens put into producing this kind of information and data for us to analyze, $5 a month is really not that much. It's a coffee, if that, depending on where you live. So I think it's just a nice way to give back to the F1 fantasy community, as I said, and what we've got on screen here has been kind of like the holy Bible, the holy gospel, the holy whatever you want to call it with F1 fantasy. So this is what I'm going to be using to guide my decisions this weekend again. And that's what I mean in terms of going back to my point earlier. It's going to be hard to pick drivers that are going to rise in price this time, even 0.2 million. There's Stroll, there's Hulkenberg, Hadjar most people have. Behrman's out of the equation now. He is well out of my team. Ocon's still hanging around. Albon firmly back on the radar, I think. So lots of options to choose from. And in terms of what that means for my team this week, as I said, Alonso, Behrman, probably the most two likely candidates at risk. For argument's sake, let's assume this is Franco Colapinto. He might be 5, he might be 5.5. But for me, the two most obvious routes is going to be Colapinto / Doohan in and Alex Albon in as well. Now, I think, again, Colapinto might come in at 5.5 because of the fact that if he goes in at 4.5, he isn't dropping in value. It almost feels like a perfect chip to use. Now, the one thing I thought about doing, but probably I'm not sure if it's the right way to use the final fix chip, but hear me out for a second. And Rain Fantasy planted this idea in my mind. I'm actually just thinking about this as I'm recording. So a lot of nonsense, a lot of dribble right now. But I'm just speaking out loud here, could I bring in Jack Doohan, even if he's not racing in Limitless, not racing in Imola, he will set a -5 for no time set in qualifying, because if your driver doesn't set a time and he's obviously an inactive driver in Imola, he gets a -5 point penalty. Then do I use the final fix to take Jack Doohan out, who won't change in price, mind you, because he's an active driver and he's at 4.5 million, and bring in someone like Nico Hulkenberg for argument's sake? And then I have Nico Hulkenberg for final fix. That weekend, I get Nico Hulkenberg's points. Then my team opens up again after the Imola deadline, and I choose to activate Limitless in Monaco. And I'll have Jack Doohan in Monaco, who again won't be scoring points for my team. So then does that mean, or I think I know what it means, I won't have Jack Doohan scoring points, so I don't get any -25 because I'll be on Limitless then. And he won't be going down in value because he's an active driver. Do I take that risk? Do I play final fix in Imola and then do I play Limitless in Monaco? I'm just thinking about this off the cuff right now, but I think that's certainly a strategy. But to go back to what my likely moves are, it probably will be Alex Albon if I don't go down the Limitless path, and Jack Doohan / Franco Colapinto at whatever price Colapinto comes in. Ferrari for me aren't really on the radar anymore. They don't look all that comfortable. I mean, we know Leclerc is very good in Monaco, but right now these feel like too obvious a move for me to make. Hadjar I already own. I could get in Stroll, but for me personally, that doesn't fit my budget entirely. He's just at a bit of an awkward price now because he had that huge spike to start the season off. He's dropped a little bit, but at the same time, 9.7 for Lance Stroll. He's just doing bits back there. He's qualifying well down the order and then just surges through the field. 25 points for me, I have to say. Very impressed. Lance Stroll has not DNF'd this season. Good on you, Lance. So that's pretty much the team, the makeup. I think if I was looking at Limitless and Imola, it would have probably been 3 McLaren, 3 Mercedes, and Max Verstappen. Like very much a similar team to what we have in Miami. Even if there's talk maybe Ferrari bring upgrades to Imola, we will have to wait and see. But that's my brain dump right now. Do I just make 2 transfers? I've got 3 handy, so I could change another driver or so. Or do I just pull the trigger on Limitless in Imola and then pick up the pieces in Monaco? So a couple of options on the table. I've got another 2 weeks to think about it, so I'm just going to sleep on it, pick things up again within about 3 or 4 days of the deadline in my final thoughts. And hopefully by that point, we've got news on Franco Colapinto. We've got a better idea rounded out around strategy for Limitless, etc. And you've got a couple of weeks or at least a week off not having to listen to me ramble non-stop. So I'm going to leave it there for now, guys. As always, team selection, try and keep it pretty brief, pretty sharp, pretty succinct. Enjoy the extra week off. I'll be back with a final thoughts video, as I said. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all very soon.